The massive space station hung in the void like a metal flower, its gleaming surfaces reflecting the light of 3 different suns. Diplomatic vessels from across the galaxy docked at its numerous ports, their hulls bearing the insignias of dozens of species. The Nexus station had been neutral ground for over 2 centuries, a place where even the most bitter enemies could meet under the protection of ancient treaties. Ambassador Sarah Chun stepped off the human transport vessel, her simple black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by other delegates. At 42, she carried herself with quiet confidence, her dark eyes taking in every detail of the station's interior. The artificial gravity felt slightly heavier than Earth standard, a compromise between the preferences of different species. "First time at the Nexus?" asked Captain Rodriguez, the transport's commanding officer. His weathered face showed concern as he watched the various alien delegations moving through the corridors. "No," Sarah replied, adjusting the small translation device at her collar. "But it's the first time I've seen so many military escorts." Indeed, what should have been a routine diplomatic gathering had taken on the atmosphere of an armed camp. Heavily armed guards flanked each delegation, their weapons barely concealed despite station regulations. The air hummed with tension that even the sophisticated environmental systems couldn't filter out. The human delegation was notably small. Besides Sarah, only 3 junior diplomats and 2 security officers had made the journey from Earth. Other species had brought dozens of representatives, some with entire battle fleets waiting just outside the station's defensive perimeter. A tall, insectoid Zephyrian approached their group, its 4 arms moving in what Sarah recognized as a formal greeting. The creature's translator produced a melodic voice that somehow managed to convey condescension despite the mechanical tones. "Ambassador Chun," the Zephyrian said, "I am Hive Speaker Crix. We are surprised to see humanity represented at this gathering." "Surprised?" Sarah kept her voice level. Earth received the same diplomatic invitation as every other member of the Galactic Council. Crix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Of course. Though given humanity's recent difficulties, we wondered if you might have more pressing concerns." The reference stung because it was accurate. Earth was indeed facing challenges. 3 of humanity's outer colonies had declared independence in the past year, citing Earth's inability to protect them from raiders. The human fleet, while technologically advanced, was spread thin across too many systems. Economically, humanity was struggling to compete with species that had millennia of experience in galactic trade. "Humanity honors its commitments," Sarah said simply. Before Crix could respond, a commotion erupted near the main conference hall. Delegates scattered as armed figures in the distinctive red armor of the Corvan Empire pushed through the crowd. At their center walked General Thaxon, his scarred reptilian features twisted into a permanent scowl. The Corvan military leader's reputation for brutality was known throughout the galaxy. "The pretense of diplomacy grows tiresome," Thaxon announced, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "The hegemony has already made its intentions clear. This gathering serves no purpose except to delay the inevitable." A collective murmur of concern rippled through the assembled delegates. The Andromedan hegemony and the Corvan Empire had been building toward war for months, their dispute over mining rights in the neutral zone escalating with each diplomatic exchange. What had started as a trade disagreement now threatened to split the galaxy into 2 armed camps. Chancellor Varix of the hegemony emerged from a side corridor, flanked by his own guards. The tall, pale humanoid's cybernetic implants gleamed under the station's lights. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of advanced artificial intelligence enhancements. "General Thaxon speaks of inevitability as if it absolves his people of responsibility for their aggression," Varix said. "The hegemony seeks only to protect legitimate claims established by treaty. Treaties written by the victors of the last war," Thaxon snarled. "The neutral zone belongs to no single power. Corvan blood has been shed defending those worlds from raiders while your people hide behind their technology." The tension in the air became almost physical. Security teams from both factions moved into position, hands drifting toward weapons. Other delegations began backing away, seeking cover behind structural supports or retreating toward their docked ships. Sarah watched the confrontation with growing alarm. If fighting broke out here, on neutral ground, it would shatter the last restraints holding back a galactic war. The ancient treaties that protected diplomatic gatherings would become meaningless. Every species would be forced to choose sides or face conquest by whichever faction emerged victorious. "Gentlemen," she said, stepping forward into the space between the two groups. Her voice was calm, but carried clearly in the sudden silence. "Perhaps we should remember where we are." Both leaders turned toward her, their expressions ranging from surprise to contempt. Thaxon's scarred features twisted into what might have been a smile. "The human speaks," he said. "How refreshing to hear from a species with actual experience in warfare, unlike these technological cowards who hide behind their machines." Varix's cybernetic implants flared with indignation. The Corvin general mistakes brutality for strength. Humanity's recent colonial difficulties hardly qualify them as military experts. "At least humans fight their own battles," Thaxon replied. "They don't rely on robotic armies to do their bleeding for them." Sarah felt the weight of every gaze in the massive hall. Representatives from dozens of species watched to see how humanity would respond to the implicit challenge. Some looked curious, others dismissive. A few seemed genuinely concerned about the deteriorating situation. "You're both right," she said finally. The unexpected response caught both leaders off guard. "General Thaxon, the Corvin Empire has indeed shed blood defending the neutral zone. Your people's courage in battle is legendary. Chancellor Varix, the hegemony's technological advancement has brought prosperity to dozens of worlds. Both of your civilizations have contributed greatly to galactic civilization." Thaxon's eyes narrowed. "Flattery will not resolve this dispute. Human." "I'm not offering flattery," Sarah replied. "I'm offering perspective. Both of your peoples have strengths the other lacks. Both have legitimate grievances. And both are about to throw away everything your ancestors built for the sake of pride." Chancellor Varix stepped closer, his enhanced features showing calculation rather than emotion. "Humanity presumes to judge matters far beyond their understanding. Your species has been part of galactic civilization for barely 2 centuries. Our disputes have roots stretching back millennia." "Exactly my point," Sarah said. "We're newcomers. We don't have the baggage of ancient grudges clouding our judgment. Sometimes an outside perspective can see solutions that aren't visible to those too close to the problem." General Thaxon laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the station's metal walls. "Solutions? Your own colonies rebel against you. Your fleet struggles to maintain order in a handful of systems. What solutions could you possibly offer?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Every species representative was listening, waiting to see if humanity would back down or step up. The future of the galaxy might well depend on her next words. "I propose a test," she said quietly. "Give me 72 hours. Let me examine the core dispute with fresh eyes, without the weight of historical precedent or political pressure. If I can find a solution that both sides can accept, you agree to implement it. If I fail, you can return to your preparations for war with clear consciences." The silence that followed was deafening. Representatives from neutral species exchanged glances, some nodding thoughtfully, while others shook their heads in disbelief. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. A human diplomat, representing one of the galaxy's younger and currently struggling civilizations, asking for the chance to solve a dispute that had stymied the best minds in the galaxy. Chancellor Varix was the first to speak. "And what guarantee do we have that any solution you propose would be unbiased? Humanity has existing trade agreements with several hegemony worlds, and military cooperation treaties with 3 Corvin systems," General Thaxon added. "Your neutrality is already compromised." Sarah nodded. "You're absolutely right. Complete neutrality is impossible. But consider this. Humanity is currently too weak to threaten either of your powers militarily. We have nothing to gain from a galactic war except the destruction of trade routes and the collapse of the peace that has allowed us to grow. Our bias is toward any solution that prevents war, regardless of which side gains advantage." She paused, letting the logic of her argument sink in. "Besides, what do you have to lose? 72 hours is nothing compared to the years of warfare you're contemplating. If my proposal fails, you'll be in the same position you're in now, but with clear evidence that diplomacy has been exhausted." The two leaders exchanged glances across the space between them. Neither wanted to appear weak by accepting help from what they clearly viewed as an inferior power. But neither could easily reject the offer without appearing unreasonable to the other neutral species watching the exchange. It was Crix, the Zephyrian hive speaker, who broke the deadlock. "The human proposal has merit," the insectoid said, its translator giving the words careful emphasis. The Zephyrian collective would be willing to serve as neutral arbiters, ensuring that both sides have equal access to review any proposals. Other neutral species quickly voiced similar offers of support. The momentum was building, creating a situation where refusing the human initiative would seem unreasonable and potentially aggressive. Chancellor Varix's cybernetic implants flickered as he processed the political implications. "Very well," he said finally. "The hegemony agrees to this experiment. But understand, human, that if you fail to produce a workable solution, we will view any further delays as Corvin stalling tactics." All eyes turned to General Thaxon. The scarred Corvin leader's expression showed his internal struggle between pride and pragmatism. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. 72 hours. "But when this fails, as it surely will, the Corvin Empire will hold humanity responsible for any additional Corvin lives lost due to this delay." "Understood," Sarah replied. "I'll need access to all relevant documents, trade records, survey data, and territorial agreements, both current and historical." "That information is classified," Varix objected. "Not anymore," Sarah said firmly. "If you want an honest analysis, I need complete transparency. Any restrictions on information will invalidate the entire process." The two leaders reluctantly agreed to provide the necessary documentation. As the crowd began to disperse, representatives from various species approached Sarah with offers of assistance and expressions of hope. Others clearly viewed the entire enterprise as futile, their skeptical glances and whispered conversations making their opinions clear. Captain Rodriguez appeared at her elbow as the main hall emptied. "Ambassador, are you sure about this? You've just put the entire reputation of humanity on the line." Sarah watched as the last of the diplomatic entourages filed out toward their respective quarters. Through the massive viewports, she could see the running lights of warships holding position just beyond the station's defensive grid. In 72 hours, those ships would either stand down or begin the most devastating conflict the galaxy had seen in centuries. "No pressure at all," she murmured to herself. The next several hours were spent establishing a temporary command center in the human delegation's quarters. The small suite of rooms was soon filled with data pads, holographic displays, and stacks of physical documents. The documentation provided by both sides was extensive, covering everything from mineral surveys to trade statistics to military incident reports. Sarah's small team worked through the night, sorting and analyzing the mountain of information. Dr. Ellen Martinez, the delegation's economic specialist, focused on trade data and resource allocation. Lieutenant Commander James Park, their military advisor, reviewed tactical assessments and security reports. The junior diplomats, Sarah Kim and Robert Chong, tackled the legal and historical precedents. As the hours passed, a pattern began to emerge. The dispute over the neutral zone was indeed complex, but it wasn't really about mining rights or territorial control. Those were symptoms of deeper issues that neither side wanted to acknowledge publicly. "Look at this," Dr. Martinez said, pointing to a series of economic projections displayed on her datapad. "Both the hegemony and the empire are facing resource shortages, but in different areas. The hegemony has abundant energy sources, but lacks rare minerals needed for their advanced technology. The Corvin Empire has rich mineral deposits, but insufficient energy production to fully exploit them." Lieutenant Commander Park nodded as he reviewed military deployment records. "And both sides have been increasing military spending dramatically over the past decade. The arms buildup is straining their economies, which makes resource scarcity even more critical." Sarah studied the data, pieces of the puzzle beginning to fall into place. So the neutral zone represents different things to each side. For the hegemony, it's a source of rare minerals they desperately need. For the Corvin Empire, it's a matter of pride and security. They can't allow a potential enemy to control strategic territory along their border. "But there's something else," Sarah Kim added. pulling up a historical timeline on her display. The neutral zone was established after the last major war, intended as a buffer between the two powers. Neither side was supposed to exploit it economically. The current dispute started when unauthorized mining operations began appearing on several worlds. Unauthorized by whom? Sarah asked. That's just it, Robert Chong said, consulting legal documents. The original treaties are ambiguous about enforcement authority. Both sides claim the right to police the zone, but neither has clear legal standing to prevent the other from doing the same. Sarah felt the first stirring of an idea. Who's actually doing the mining? Dr. Martinez pulled up another set of data. That's the interesting part. Most of the operations appear to be run by independent contractors and small commercial enterprises. But when you trace the funding and equipment sources, they're being backed by both sides, Sarah finished. The hegemony and the empire are using proxies to test each other's resolve while maintaining plausible deniability. The picture was becoming clearer. Both powers were maneuvering for position in the neutral zone, but neither wanted to be seen as the first to violate the treaties. The result was a dangerous game of escalation that was spiraling toward open conflict. As dawn broke over the Nexus Station's artificial cycle, Sarah called her team together for a strategy session. The conference room's viewport showed the continuing buildup of military vessels in the surrounding space. More ships arrived every hour, their presence a constant reminder of how little time remained. We need to think outside the conventional framework, Sarah said. Both sides are approaching this as a zero-sum game. Either the hegemony gets what it wants or the Corvin Empire does. But what if there's a third option? Lieutenant Commander Park looked skeptical. You're talking about finding a solution that gives both sides what they need without either side losing face. In my experience, that usually requires one side to be significantly stronger than the other, forcing a negotiated settlement. Or it requires changing the nature of the game entirely, Sarah replied. What if the problem isn't the neutral zone itself, but the artificial scarcity that makes it seem so valuable? Dr. Martinez leaned forward, intrigued. You're thinking about alternative resource sources? I'm thinking about cooperation instead of competition, Sarah said. Both sides have resources the other needs. Both sides are spending enormous amounts on military buildup instead of economic development. What if we could show them a path that addresses their real needs while reducing their security concerns? Over the next 12 hours, the team worked feverishly to develop what Sarah privately thought of as the impossible proposal. It would require both sides to make concessions that would be difficult to sell to their respective populations. It would also require a level of trust that seemed unlikely given the current level of hostility. But as the proposal took shape, Sarah began to believe it might actually work. The key was addressing the underlying needs of both civilizations while providing mechanisms for verification and enforcement that neither side could manipulate. The question was whether she could convince two proud and suspicious powers to take the biggest leap of faith in galactic history. With 36 hours remaining, Sarah requested a preliminary meeting with both sides to outline her initial findings. The response was swift and predictable. Both leaders insisted on separate briefings, unwilling to be seen in the same room unless absolutely necessary. Sarah decided to start with Chancellor Varix, partly because the hegemony's technological advantages made them theoretically more flexible in their approach to problem-solving. The meeting took place in a secure conference room in the station's diplomatic quarter, with representatives from several neutral species observing to ensure fair proceedings. Varix arrived with a small entourage of advisors, their cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the room's artificial lights. The Chancellor himself was an imposing figure, tall and pale with silver implants that enhanced both his intellectual capabilities and his connection to the hegemony's vast information networks. Ambassador Chun, he said formally as he took his seat, I confess to curiosity about what solutions a human perspective might offer to problems that have challenged galactic civilization for decades. Thank you for your time, Chancellor, Sarah replied. Before I outline my preliminary findings, I'd like to confirm my understanding of the hegemony's core concerns. She activated a holographic display showing resource flowcharts and economic projections. Your primary need is access to rare mineral deposits, particularly the trilithium and quantum crystals required for your most advanced technologies. Current suppliers are either unreliable or politically problematic, making the neutral zone deposits strategically critical. Varix nodded. A correct assessment. The hegemony's technological superiority depends on maintaining access to these resources. Any solution that compromises this requirement would be unacceptable. Understood. However, I'd like to present an alternative that might better serve your long-term interests. Sarah changed the display to show galactic trade routes and resource distribution patterns. The neutral zone contains significant mineral deposits, but they're not the largest or richest in the galaxy. Your focus on them is driven partly by their proximity and partly by the desire to deny them to the Corvin Empire. An oversimplification, but not entirely inaccurate, one of Varix's advisors admitted. What if I could show you a path to more abundant resources while simultaneously reducing the military expenditures that are currently draining your economy? Sarah asked. Varix's cybernetic implants flickered with interest. Continue. Sarah outlined the first part of her proposal, a resource-sharing agreement that would give the hegemony access to Corvin mineral wealth in exchange for energy technology and production capacity. The idea was radical, requiring both sides to become economically interdependent in ways that would make war practically impossible. You propose that we become dependent on our greatest rivals for critical resources, Varix said when she finished. The security implications are enormous. Are they worse than the security implications of a galactic war? Sarah countered. Your current path leads to either military defeat, victory at enormous cost, or a stalemate that leaves both sides vulnerable to other threats. She brought up intelligence reports about emerging dangers from the galactic rim, refugee populations fleeing unknown threats, long-range sensors detecting massive energy signatures of unknown origin. The galaxy is changing, Chancellor. New challenges are emerging that will require cooperation to address. The current conflict makes both the hegemony and the Empire weaker in the face of these potential threats. The meeting continued for 2 hours, with Varix and his advisors asking detailed questions about implementation, verification, and enforcement mechanisms. Sarah could see the Chancellor's enhanced intellect working through the implications, calculating probabilities and outcomes with machine-like precision. The proposal has merit, Varix admitted finally, but it assumes a level of trust that does not currently exist between our civilizations. How do you propose to bridge that gap? Gradually, with safeguards and verification systems that protect both sides, Sarah replied. And with neutral oversight from species that have no stake in the outcome except galactic stability. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic. Varix hadn't rejected the proposal outright, which was more progress than she'd dared hope for. But she knew the real test would come with General Thaxon and the Corvin delegation. The Corvin Empire's approach to diplomacy was as different from the hegemony's as their military tactics. Where Varix brought advisors and data analysts, Thaxon arrived with warriors and security specialists. The scarred general's presence filled the conference room with an aura of barely controlled violence that made even the neutral observers nervous. Human, Thaxon said without preamble. I am here because I gave my word. Do not mistake this for weakness or acceptance of your authority to judge Corvin affairs. I understand completely, General, Sarah replied. And I respect the Corvin Empire's proud military tradition. What I'm offering isn't judgment, but an alternative to a war that will cost countless Corvin lives. Thaxon's scarred features showed skepticism. Wars are sometimes necessary. The Corvin people do not fear death in service to the Empire. I know they don't, Sarah said. That's what makes them formidable allies and dangerous enemies. But courage in battle is different from wisdom and strategy. The greatest generals in history knew when to fight and when to seek other solutions. She could see that she'd touched something in the old warrior's pride. Thaxon had commanded Corvin forces for over 30 years, earning his scars in conflicts across the galaxy. His tactical brilliance was legendary, but so was his ability to minimize casualties through careful planning and superior strategy. Sarah activated the holographic display, showing the current military buildup and projected casualties for various conflict scenarios. Your tactical assessments predict victory against the hegemony, but at a cost of approximately 60% casualties among frontline units. That's an entire generation of Corvin warriors. Freedom is worth any price, one of Thaxon's subordinates declared. Is it freedom you're fighting for? Sarah asked. Or is it pride? The room fell silent. Such a direct challenge to Corvin motivations was dangerously close to insult, but Sarah pressed on before anyone could respond. The neutral zone territories won't make the Corvin Empire free. They're already free. Those worlds won't make your people significantly richer or safer. What they will do is prove that the Empire can take what it wants through force of arms. Thaxon's eyes narrowed dangerously. You think the Corvin Empire fights for sport? I think the Corvin Empire fights because it's what they do best, Sarah replied. And because diplomatic alternatives have always seemed like weakness to a culture that values strength above all else. But what if I could show you a path to greater strength without the cost of war? She changed the display to show economic projections and resource utilization models. Unlike her presentation to Varix, this one focused on military applications and strategic advantages rather than abstract economic benefits. The hegemony has energy technology that could revolutionize Corvin industry, she explained. Fusion reactors that are 3 times more efficient than current Corvin designs. Manufacturing techniques that could increase your shipyard's output by 200%. In exchange, the Empire has mineral resources that the hegemony desperately needs. You propose that we trade with our enemies, Thaxon said flatly. I propose that you turn your enemies into trading partners, Sarah corrected. Economic interdependence doesn't make nations weak. It makes them wealthy enough to build stronger militaries if needed. She brought up historical examples from human civilization, showing how former enemies had become allies through trade and mutual interest. The transformation wasn't always easy or quick, but it was ultimately more effective than conquest in creating lasting security. General Thaxon listened in silence as Sarah outlined the full proposal. Unlike Varix, who had asked technical questions about implementation, the Corvin leader focused on strategic implications and potential vulnerabilities. His questions were sharp and practical, revealing a military mind that understood the broader implications of economic warfare. This plan requires trust, he said finally. The Corvin Empire has learned through bitter experience that trust is a luxury we cannot afford. Then, don't trust them, Sarah said. Trust the verification systems. Trust the neutral oversight. Trust the fact that breaking the agreement would be economically catastrophic for both sides. The meeting lasted longer than the one with Varix, partly because Thaxon insisted on exploring every possible way the agreement could be exploited or undermined. Sarah found herself impressed by the general's strategic thinking, even as she worked to address his concerns. When the session finally ended, Thaxon stood without offering any indication of his decision. You will have our answer when the time limit expires, he said formally. Do not mistake consideration for acceptance. With 24 hours remaining, Sarah returned to her quarters to make final preparations for the formal presentation. The team had worked tirelessly to refine the proposal, addressing potential objections and creating detailed implementation timelines. But as she reviewed the documents one final time, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The proposal was technically sound and economically beneficial for both sides. It addressed their core needs while providing adequate safeguards against exploitation. But it didn't address the fundamental issue that had brought the galaxy to the brink of war, the deep mistrust and cultural antipathy between 2 very different civilizations. Dr. Martinez found her staring out the viewport at the assembled fleets, lost in thought. Having second thoughts? Third and fourth thoughts, Sarah admitted. The proposal should work, but should isn't enough when you're trying to prevent a war. What's bothering you? Sarah was quiet for a long moment before answering. I keep thinking about something my grandfather told me. He was a mediator in corporate disputes back on Earth. He used to say that most conflicts aren't really about what people think they're about. They're about respect, recognition, and fear of being diminished. And you think that applies here? I think both sides are afraid, Sarah said slowly. The hegemony is afraid that their technological advantages won't be enough if resources become scarce. The Corvin Empire is afraid that they're becoming obsolete in a galaxy that increasingly values machines over warriors. The neutral zone is just where those fears happen to intersect. Dr. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. So how do you address fears that neither side wants to admit they have? Sarah turned away from the viewport, a new determination in her eyes. You give them a way to be strong together instead of weak apart. The idea that crystallized in that moment would require her to take an even bigger risk than she'd already taken. It would mean proposing something that had never been attempted in galactic history, a solution so radical that both sides might reject it out of hand. But, as she looked out at the ships preparing for war, Sarah realized that conventional solutions had already failed. If humanity was going to justify its place in the galaxy, it would have to offer something truly extraordinary. The final presentation was scheduled for the next evening, with representatives from every major species in attendance. The main conference hall had been configured for maximum drama, with the human delegation's modest platform positioned between the much larger hegemony and Corvin sections. Neutral species filled the surrounding tiers, their diverse forms creating a living representation of galactic civilization. Sarah stood alone at the podium, her simple diplomatic uniform making her appear almost insignificant among the elaborate costumes and ceremonial armor around her. The weight of expectation was almost physical, pressing down on her as hundreds of eyes focused on her small figure. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. 72 hours ago, I asked for the chance to find a solution to the crisis facing our galaxy. I stand before you now not with easy answers, but with a proposal that challenges everything we think we know about power, security, and cooperation among the stars. She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. But first, I want to acknowledge what we're really facing here. This isn't just a dispute over mining rights or territorial control. This is a choice about what kind of galaxy we want to live in. Do we want a galaxy where might makes right, where the strong prey on the weak, and where every disagreement is settled by force? Or do we want something better? The hall was absolutely silent, every delegate hanging on her words. Sarah could see Chancellor Varix's cybernetic implants flickering as he processed her statements, while General Thaxon sat motionless, his scarred features revealing nothing. For too long, we've accepted that conflict between great powers is inevitable, Sarah continued. We've treated war as a natural disaster, something to be endured rather than prevented. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the very thing we think makes us strong is actually making us weak? She activated the hall's holographic display system, showing casualty projections for the projected war between the hegemony and the Empire. The numbers were staggering. Millions of military deaths, civilian casualties from disrupted trade routes, economic collapse affecting dozens of worlds. These are the costs of traditional thinking, she said. But they assume that strength comes from the ability to destroy your enemies. I propose that true strength comes from the ability to create something greater than the sum of its parts. The display changed to show her economic analysis, demonstrating how cooperation between the two powers could benefit both civilizations. But instead of stopping there, Sarah revealed the truly revolutionary part of her proposal. I'm not just suggesting a trade agreement, she said. I'm proposing the creation of the first truly integrated galactic institution, a joint development corporation that would be owned equally by both civilizations, managed by neutral oversight, and dedicated to exploring and developing resources throughout the galaxy. A murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. The idea was unprecedented, two rival powers voluntarily sharing control of a major economic enterprise. The implications were staggering. This corporation would have exclusive development rights to the neutral zone, Sarah continued. But its mandate would extend far beyond those worlds. Current surveys show vast unexplored regions of the galaxy rich in resources that dwarf anything in the disputed territories. Instead of fighting over scraps, why not work together to claim the whole feast? General Thaxon was the first to speak. You propose that the Corvin Empire share its strength with those who have been our enemies. I propose that the Corvin Empire multiply its strength by allying with those who have been your rivals, Sarah corrected. Your people's courage and tactical brilliance combined with hegemony technology and industrial capacity could achieve things that neither civilization could accomplish alone. Chancellor Varix's response was more measured. The technological and economic benefits are clear, but the political challenges would be enormous. How do you propose to maintain balance between two very different civilizations? Sarah had been prepared for this question. Through the one thing both civilizations respect, merit. The corporation would be governed by proven competence rather than political appointment. Corvin officers would command security operations. Hegemony engineers would oversee technological development. Every position would be filled by the best qualified individual regardless of their species. She could see the idea taking hold in the minds of her audience. The concept was radical, but it addressed the core fears and needs of both sides while opening possibilities that neither had considered. But this is about more than just the hegemony and the Corvin Empire, Sarah continued, her voice rising with conviction. This is about proving that galactic civilization can evolve beyond the primitive cycle of conflict and conquest. It's about showing that cooperation isn't weakness. It's the ultimate expression of strength. The hall erupted in discussion as delegates conferred with their advisors and transmitted messages to their home governments. Sarah remained at the podium, watching the controlled chaos with a mixture of hope and terror. She had thrown everything into this moment, gambling humanity's future on the belief that other species could rise above their instincts for dominance and territory. It was Chancellor Varix who called for order, his enhanced voice cutting through the noise with mechanical precision. The proposal is intriguing, he said carefully, but it requires assurances that the hegemony's technological advantages would not be diluted or compromised, and guarantees that Corvin sovereignty would be respected, General Thaxon added, his tone equally cautious. Sarah nodded to both leaders. Those assurances would be built into the corporation's charter. But, more importantly, success would require both civilizations to contribute their greatest strengths. Failure would hurt both sides equally, creating natural incentives for cooperation. The debate that followed lasted several hours, with representatives from dozens of species offering opinions, objections, and suggested modifications. Some delegates were openly skeptical, pointing out the many ways such an arrangement could fail. Others were intrigued by the possibilities, particularly the neutral species that stood to benefit from increased galactic stability. As the discussion continued, Sarah found herself answering an endless stream of questions about implementation details, oversight mechanisms, and dispute resolution procedures. Each answer led to 3 more questions, and she could feel the proposal being dissected and analyzed from every possible angle. But, through it all, she noticed something important. Neither General Thaxon nor Chancellor Varix had rejected the proposal outright. Both were engaging with the details, asking practical questions about how it might work rather than theoretical objections to why it couldn't work. That engagement suggested they were seriously considering the possibility. Finally, as the station's artificial night cycle began, the formal session adjourned. Both leaders announced that they would provide their final decisions within 12 hours, after consulting with their respective governments. The galaxy would have its answer by dawn. Sarah returned to her quarters exhausted, but oddly hopeful. She had done everything possible within the constraints of logic and persuasion. Now it was up to forces beyond her control, the wisdom of distant governments, the courage of leaders facing unprecedented choices, and perhaps simple luck. As she prepared for what might be her last night on the station, Sarah reflected on the strange path that had led her to this moment. 3 days ago, she had been just another diplomat representing a struggling human colony. Now she was potentially the architect of a new form of galactic civilization. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but it was balanced by the knowledge that she had offered the best solution her team could devise. Whether it would be accepted was no longer in her hands. Outside her window, the assembled fleets continued their careful dance of position and threat. Tomorrow, those ships would either stand down and begin the long journey home, or they would light up the darkness with the fires of war. The fate of countless worlds hung in the balance, awaiting the dawn and the decisions it would bring. Sarah Chun, diplomat of Earth and architect of the impossible, settled in to wait for the answer that would determine the future of the galaxy. The artificial dawn came slowly to Nexus Station, its carefully programmed light gradually illuminating the massive diplomatic complex. Sarah Chun had barely slept, her mind racing through endless variations of what the morning might bring. She stood at the viewport of her quarters, watching the assembled fleets that held position in the darkness beyond the station's defensive grid. In 6 hours, the deadline would expire. The responses from both the Andromedan hegemony and the Corvan Empire would determine whether her unprecedented proposal had succeeded or whether the galaxy would descend into the most devastating war in recorded history. Dr. Martinez found her there, holding 2 cups of coffee from the delegation's small kitchen unit. "Any word yet?" "Nothing official," Sarah replied, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "But the message traffic between the fleets and their home governments has been constant all night. Both sides are definitely taking this seriously." "That's something, at least," Martinez said. "Even if they reject the proposal, the fact that they're giving it serious consideration might open doors for future negotiations." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained troubled. "I keep thinking about what happens if this fails. Not just the immediate war, but what it means for humanity's place in the galaxy. We've positioned ourselves as mediators and problem solvers. If we can't deliver on that promise, then we'll deal with the consequences," Martinez replied firmly. "But don't forget what we've already accomplished. 3 days ago, both sides were convinced that war was inevitable. Now they're at least considering an alternative. That's not nothing." A soft chime from Sarah's communication unit interrupted their conversation. The message display showed an incoming transmission marked with the highest diplomatic priority codes. Sarah's pulse quickened as she activated the secure channel. The holographic projection that materialized showed Ambassador Kell, the Andromedan hegemony's senior diplomat. His pale, augmented features were composed, but Sarah thought she detected a hint of something unusual in his expression: uncertainty, perhaps, or even hope. "Ambassador Chun," Kell said formally, "Chancellor Varix has asked me to inform you that the Hegemony Council has reached a preliminary decision regarding your proposal. The Chancellor requests a private meeting before the formal deadline expires." "Of course," Sarah replied, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "When and where would be convenient?" "Conference Room 7, in 1 hour." The Chancellor specifically requested that this meeting remain confidential until after the formal announcement. The transmission ended, leaving Sarah and Martinez staring at each other in stunned silence. A preliminary decision suggested that the hegemony had found something in the proposal worth pursuing. But the request for confidentiality was puzzling and potentially concerning. "What do you think they want?" Martinez asked. "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "But the fact that they want to meet privately suggests they might be interested in modifications or conditions we haven't considered." The next hour passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah reviewed her notes and prepared for every possible scenario she could imagine, but the uncertainty gnawed at her. When the appointed time finally arrived, she made her way through the station's corridors to the designated meeting room, her footsteps echoing in the unusual quiet. Conference Room 7 was smaller than the main diplomatic chambers, designed for intimate discussions rather than formal presentations. Chancellor Varix was already waiting when Sarah arrived, accompanied only by Ambassador Kell and a single advisor whose cybernetic enhancements marked her as one of the hegemony's strategic analysts. "Ambassador Chun," Varix said, rising as she entered. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Please be seated." Sarah took the offered chair, noting the careful arrangement of the furniture. This wasn't a confrontational setup. The chairs were positioned to facilitate conversation rather than negotiation. Whatever Varix wanted to discuss, he intended it to be collaborative. "I'll be direct," the Chancellor began. "The Hegemony Council has voted to accept your proposal, subject to certain modifications and safeguards." Sarah felt a surge of relief and excitement, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm pleased to hear that, Chancellor. What modifications did the Council have in mind?" Varix activated a small holographic projector, displaying a complex organizational chart. "The Joint Development Corporation you proposed is feasible, but we believe it requires additional oversight mechanisms. The hegemony suggests the creation of a tripartite governing structure." Sarah studied the display, trying to understand the implications. Tripartite. The corporation would be governed by representatives from the hegemony, the Corvan Empire, and a coalition of neutral species, Ambassador Kell explained. This would ensure that neither major power could dominate the enterprise while providing smaller civilizations with a stake in its success. The suggestion was intriguing and addressed one of the concerns that several neutral delegates had raised during the previous day's discussions. A three-way governance structure would be more complex, but it might also be more stable in the long term. That's an interesting modification, Sarah said carefully. What role would the neutral coalition play? They would hold the deciding vote in cases of disagreement between the hegemony and empire, the strategic analyst explained. But they would also contribute resources and expertise to the corporation's operations. This isn't charity, it's expanded partnership. Sarah could see the political brilliance of the modification. By including neutral species as equal partners, the corporation would become a truly galactic institution rather than just an agreement between two major powers. It would also create a constituency for peace that extended far beyond the original disputants. The council found this acceptable? She asked. More than acceptable, Varix replied. The expanded partnership model actually increases the corporation's potential for success while reducing political risks. If the venture fails, it won't be seen as a failure of hegemony policy, but as a failed galactic experiment. Sarah nodded, understanding the political calculation. And, if it succeeds, the hegemony becomes the co-architect of a new model for galactic cooperation. Precisely. But there's another modification we believe necessary. Varix changed the holographic display to show a timeline marked with implementation phases and milestone reviews. The Hegemony Council insists on a gradual implementation process with clearly defined evaluation points. If the partnership isn't producing the expected benefits, either side should be able to withdraw without penalty. The cautious approach made sense from a political standpoint, but Sarah was concerned about its practical implications. How gradual are we talking about? Phase 1 would involve joint development of 3 systems in the neutral zone, with shared resources and integrated command structures, Ambassador Kell explained. If that proves successful after 2 years, we would expand to additional systems and increase the scope of cooperation. And if General Thaxon and the Corvin Empire agree to these modifications, Chancellor Varix's cybernetic implants flickered, suggesting internal calculations or communications she couldn't perceive. Then, the hegemony is prepared to sign the agreement immediately. But, Ambassador Chen, we need your assessment of the Empire's likely response. Your team's analysis of Corvin psychology and decision-making processes could be crucial. Sarah considered the question carefully. The modifications were reasonable and actually strengthened the proposal, but they also introduced new complexities that might concern the Empire. General Thaxon values direct action and clear chains of command. The tripartite structure might worry him because it could slow decision-making and dilute Corvin influence. How would you suggest presenting it to minimize those concerns? Emphasize the enhanced opportunities for Corvin military leadership, Sarah replied. With neutral species as partners, the corporation will need security operations across multiple systems. That means command positions for qualified Corvin officers and opportunities to demonstrate their tactical superiority on a galactic stage. The strategic analyst nodded approvingly. An appeal to Corvin pride and martial culture. Logical. It's not manipulation, Sarah said firmly. It's recognition of what the Corvin Empire genuinely brings to the partnership. Their military expertise is valuable, and they deserve to see that value acknowledged and utilized. Chancellor Varix studied her for a long moment. You speak of them with respect, despite their reputation for aggression. I speak of them with honesty, Sarah corrected. The Corvin Empire has flaws, just as the hegemony does. But they also have strengths that shouldn't be dismissed or undervalued. If this partnership is going to work, all sides need to approach it with genuine respect for what the others bring to the table. The meeting continued for another hour, working through details and potential complications. By the time it concluded, Sarah had a clear understanding of the hegemony's position and the modifications they considered essential. More importantly, she sensed a genuine commitment from Varix and his team to make the partnership succeed. One final question, Ambassador, Varix said as the meeting ended. Why did you do this? Your species had little to gain from mediating this dispute, and failure would have damaged humanity's reputation significantly. Sarah considered her answer carefully. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the necessary thing to do. The galaxy is changing, Chancellor. We can either change with it or be swept aside by forces beyond our control. I'd rather try to shape that change than simply react to it. As she left the conference room, Sarah felt a cautious optimism building. The hegemony's acceptance, even with modifications, was a major step forward. But the real test would come with General Thaxon and the Corvan Empire delegation. She had barely returned to the human quarters when another priority message arrived. This one bore the seal of the Corvan Empire, and Sarah's heart rate accelerated as she opened the communication channel. The face that appeared in the holographic projection was not General Thaxon's, but that of War Commander Kress, the Empire's chief military strategist. The Corvan officer's scarred features were even more intimidating than Thaxon's, marked by battles across dozens of worlds. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute military command. Human diplomat, Kress said without preamble. General Thaxon requires immediate conference. Diplomatic Chamber 12. Come alone. The transmission cut off before Sarah could respond, leaving her staring at the empty air where the projection had been. The tone was ominous, but the fact that Thaxon wanted to meet at all was encouraging. If the Corvan Empire had decided to reject the proposal outright, they wouldn't bother with a face-to-face meeting. Diplomatic Chamber 12 was located in a section of the station reserved for sensitive negotiations. The room was austere compared to the more elaborate conference spaces, with plain walls and simple furniture that emphasized function over form. When Sarah arrived, she found General Thaxon waiting with War Commander Kress and two other senior officers whose names she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense, but not hostile. Thaxon's expression was thoughtful rather than angry, and Sarah took that as a positive sign. The general gestured for her to take a seat across from the Corvan delegation, the arrangement formal, but not intimidating. Ambassador Chun, Thaxon began, his voice measured. The Empire Council has reviewed your proposal. It has merit. Sarah felt a wave of relief, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm glad the Council found it worthy of consideration, General. Consideration, yes. But the Empire has concerns that must be addressed before any agreement can be finalized. Of course. What concerns can I help address? War Commander Kress leaned forward, his scarred features intense. The proposal assumes that Corvan warriors will serve under joint command structures. This is problematic. Corvan military tradition demands clear chains of command and absolute loyalty to the Empire. Sarah had anticipated this objection. I understand those concerns, War Commander. But consider this. Under the proposed structure, Corvan officers would command security operations across multiple systems, with resources and authority far exceeding anything currently available to the Empire. You wouldn't be serving under foreign command. You would be exercising Corvan command on a galactic scale. Explain, Thaxon said curtly. Sarah activated her portable holographic projector, showing the modified organizational structure she discussed with Chancellor Varix. The tripartite governance model creates three distinct operational divisions within the corporation. The hegemony would oversee technological development, the neutral coalition would handle civilian administration, and the Corvan Empire would command all security and military operations. She could see interest flickering in the Corvan officers' eyes as they studied the projected command structure. The arrangement gave the Empire clear authority over a significant aspect of the corporation's operations while providing legitimate reasons for maintaining large military forces. What does security operations encompass? One of the unnamed officers asked. Protection of corporate assets across multiple systems, threat assessment and response, exploration escort duties, and rapid response to emergencies, Sarah replied. Essentially, everything that requires military expertise and capability. War Commander Kress was studying the projections with obvious interest. The scope of operations would be unprecedented. Command of multi-system security operations has never been offered to any single military force. Because it's never been necessary before, Sarah said. But the scale of the proposed development activities requires security capabilities that exceed anything currently available. The Corvan Empire would essentially be creating a new model of military organization. General Thaxton was quiet for several minutes, his scarred features showing the intense mental calculation that had made him one of the galaxy's most feared military strategists. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of cautious interest. "The operational advantages are clear," he admitted. "But there are political complications. How do we ensure that this arrangement doesn't compromise Corvin's sovereignty or independence?" "Through the governing structure," Sarah explained. "Each partner maintains veto power over decisions that affect their core interests. The Corvin Empire couldn't be forced to take actions that conflict with their fundamental values or strategic needs." She changed the display to show the decision-making process, highlighting the safeguards built into the system. "But, more importantly, success depends on all partners contributing their best efforts. Failure would hurt everyone involved, creating natural incentives for cooperation. And if the partnership dissolves, then each party retains ownership of the assets they contributed, plus a proportional share of any jointly developed resources," Sarah replied. "The Empire wouldn't lose anything by trying, but they could gain access to opportunities that would otherwise be impossible to achieve." The discussion continued for over 2 hours, with the Corvin officers asking detailed questions about command structures, resource allocation, and operational protocols. Sarah found herself impressed by their strategic thinking, even as she worked to address their concerns about maintaining military honor and independence. Finally, General Thaxton called for a brief recess. The Corvin officers huddled together in quiet conversation while Sarah waited, trying to read their expressions and body language for clues about their decision. The wait felt endless, but she forced herself to remain patient. When they resumed, Thaxton's expression had changed subtly. The skepticism was still there, but it was balanced by something that looked almost like anticipation. "The Empire Council has authorized me to accept your proposal," he said formally, "subject to the modifications we've discussed, and one additional condition." Sarah's heart leaped, but she kept her voice steady. "What condition?" "The Corvin Empire insists on conducting a full military assessment of all proposed development sites before operations begin," War Commander Kress explained. "We need to ensure that security protocols are adequate and that potential threats are properly evaluated." The condition was reasonable and actually strengthened the overall security of the venture. "That seems entirely appropriate," Sarah said. "In fact, I would recommend that such assessments be a standard part of the pre-development process." General Thaxton nodded approvingly. "Good. Then, we are in agreement. The Corvin Empire will sign the partnership accord, contingent on final approval from both the hegemony and the neutral coalition." As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. Both major powers had agreed to the proposal, albeit with modifications that actually improved the original plan. But she knew the hardest part was still ahead, convincing the neutral species to join as equal partners rather than simply observers. The final phase of negotiations would require delicate diplomacy and careful coalition building. Too many neutral species were hesitant to involve themselves in what they saw as a potential conflict between major powers. Others were concerned about being overshadowed by their more powerful partners. Sarah spent the remaining hours before the formal deadline meeting with representatives from key neutral civilizations. The Zephyrian Collective, with their sophisticated economic analysis capabilities, would be crucial for managing the corporation's complex financial operations. The Centauran Federation could provide expertise in terraforming and planetary development. The Rigelian Assembly had advanced transportation technology that would be essential for multi-system operations. Each species had their own concerns and requirements, but Sarah found them surprisingly receptive to the expanded partnership model. The promise of equal participation in a major galactic enterprise appealed to civilizations that had often felt marginalized by the dominance of larger powers. By the time the formal deadline arrived, Sarah had assembled a coalition of 12 neutral species willing to participate as equal partners in the proposed corporation. The number was larger than she'd dared hope for, creating a truly representative galactic institution. The final presentation took place in the main conference hall, with every delegate in attendance to witness what might be the most important diplomatic agreement in galactic history. Sarah stood once again at the central podium, but this time she wasn't alone. Chancellor Varix and General Thaxton flanked her, their presence symbolizing the unprecedented cooperation that was about to be formalized. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "3 days ago, we gathered here on the brink of war. Today, we stand ready to create something that has never existed before, a truly cooperative galactic institution designed to benefit all civilizations through shared effort and mutual respect." She outlined the modified proposal, explaining how the tripartite structure would work and what role each partner would play. The response was immediate and positive, with delegates from dozens of species expressing support for the expanded partnership model. Chancellor Varix spoke next, his enhanced voice carrying the authority of the Andromedan hegemony. "The Hegemony Council has voted unanimously to support this initiative. We believe it represents not just a solution to the current crisis, but a model for future cooperation among galactic civilizations." General Thaxton's statement was briefer, but equally significant. "The Corvin Empire agrees to this partnership. We pledge our honor and our strength to its success." The formal signing ceremony took over an hour, with representatives from 15 different civilizations adding their seals to the historic agreement. As each signature was added, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility growing. They had created something unprecedented, but success would depend on making it work in practice. When the ceremony concluded, the hall erupted in celebration. Delegates who had arrived expecting to witness the beginning of a galactic war instead found themselves participants in the creation of a new form of interspecies cooperation. The relief was palpable, but so was the sense of possibility. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Sarah found herself standing with Chancellor Varix and General Thaxton near the chamber's main viewport. Outside, the assembled fleets were already beginning to withdraw, their running lights creating streams of light as they departed for their home systems. "This is just the beginning," Varix observed, his cybernetic implants reflecting the moving lights. "Implementation will be far more challenging than negotiation." "Challenges are meant to be overcome," Thaxton replied gruffly. "The Corvin Empire doesn't accept failure as an option." Sarah smiled at the exchange, recognizing the beginning of what she hoped would become a productive working relationship between two very different leaders. "Then, we'd better make sure we succeed. The galaxy is watching." Over the following days, as the Nexus station returned to its normal peaceful routine, detailed planning for the new corporation began in earnest. Teams of experts from all participating civilizations worked to establish operational protocols, command structures, and resource allocation systems. The process wasn't without challenges. Cultural differences led to misunderstandings, competing priorities created friction, and the sheer complexity of coordinating 15 different civilizations sometimes seemed overwhelming. But beneath the surface difficulties, Sarah detected something that gave her hope, a genuine commitment from all parties to make the partnership work. The hegemony's technological expertise proved invaluable for establishing communication networks and data management systems. Corvin military precision brought order to the chaotic planning process and ensured that security considerations were properly integrated from the beginning. The neutral species contributed specialized knowledge and provided fresh perspectives that often led to innovative solutions. Within a week, the basic framework was in place. The corporation would be known as the Galactic Development Consortium, with headquarters on a purpose-built station in the former neutral zone. Each partner civilization would contribute resources according to their capabilities, and profits would be shared based on both contribution and participation. The first development sites had been identified, 3 systems with rich mineral deposits and strategic locations that would serve as proving grounds for the new cooperative model. Corvin security forces were already conducting preliminary assessments, while hegemony engineers began planning extraction and processing facilities. But, perhaps most importantly, the partnership had created a framework for resolving future disputes before they could escalate to violence. The success of the mediation process had demonstrated that alternatives to war were possible, even between civilizations with fundamentally different values and cultures. As Sarah prepared to return to Earth to brief her government on the agreement, she reflected on the unexpected turns her career had taken. 3 months ago, She had been a mid-level diplomat dealing with routine trade negotiations. Now she was returning as the architect of a new form of galactic civilization. The responsibility was daunting, but so was the opportunity. Humanity had positioned itself as a neutral mediator and problem solver, a role that could give them influence far beyond their current military or economic power. If they could build on this success, the future might hold possibilities that no one had previously imagined. The transport ship that would carry her home was already docked at the station, its crew making final preparations for departure. Sarah took one last look at the Nexus station's main hall, remembering the tension and fear that had filled it just days earlier. Now it hummed with productive activity as representatives from across the galaxy worked together on their shared enterprise. Dr. Martinez joined her as she made her way to the docking bay. "Any regrets?" the economist asked. Sarah considered the question as they walked through corridors that had witnessed the transformation of galactic politics. "Ask me in 5 years," she said finally, "when we know whether we created something lasting or just postponed the inevitable." "I think we did more than that," Martinez replied confidently. "I think we changed what inevitable means." As their transport departed the station and began the long journey back to Earth, Sarah watched through the viewport as the lights of construction vessels began appearing around the first development sites. The real work was just beginning, but the foundation had been laid for something unprecedented in galactic history. The galaxy that had teetered on the edge of war was now embarking on an experiment in cooperation that could transform the nature of interstellar civilization. And at the center of it all was a simple recognition that strength came not from the ability to destroy one's enemies, but from the ability to turn them into partners. Time would tell whether the experiment would succeed, but for now, the galaxy was at peace. And for the first time in decades, that peace was based not on the balance of terror, but on the promise of mutual prosperity and shared achievement. The future was uncertain, but it was no longer inevitable. And that, Sarah thought as she settled in for the long journey home, might be humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy. The belief that tomorrow could be better than today, if only people had the courage to reach for something greater than themselves. 2 years after the signing of the historic accord at Nexus Station, the first phase of the Galactic Development Consortium was showing results that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Sarah Chin stood in the observation deck of New Harmony Station, the consortium's headquarters in the heart of what had once been the disputed neutral zone, watching the controlled chaos of interstellar commerce that now filled the surrounding space. Massive cargo haulers from a dozen different species moved in carefully coordinated patterns, their holds filled with rare minerals extracted from the consortium's joint operations. Sleek hegemony research vessels shared orbital space with Corvin security cruisers, while smaller ships from neutral member species darted between them like busy insects. The sight would have been impossible to imagine just 2 years earlier. Ambassador Chun? The voice belonged to Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the consortium's newly appointed director of operations. The young economist had proven herself during the complex negotiations that followed the initial agreement, and her appointment to the senior position had been enthusiastically supported by all member civilizations. "Yes, Dr. Tanaka?" Sarah turned from the viewport, noting the excitement in the younger woman's expression. "The quarterly reports are ready for your review. I think you'll be pleased with the numbers." Sarah accepted the data pad and scanned through the figures. The consortium's first 3 mining operations had not only met their production targets, but exceeded them by an average of 23%. More importantly, the integrated command structure was functioning smoothly, with Corvin security forces, hegemony technical teams, and neutral species administrators working together with an efficiency that had surprised everyone involved. "These are impressive results," Sarah said. "What does Admiral Kress think about the security situation?" "She's cautiously optimistic," Tanaka replied. "The war commander has been promoted since taking charge of consortium security operations. She reports that coordinated patrols have reduced piracy in consortium space by over 70%. More significantly, the joint training programs between Corvin forces and other member militaries are creating new tactical doctrines that benefit everyone involved." Sarah nodded approvingly. The promotion of the former War Commander Kress to full admiral had been a significant gesture of trust from the Corvan Empire. Her success in adapting traditional Corvan military doctrine to the needs of multi-species cooperation had exceeded all expectations. And Chancellor Varrix's assessment of the technological integration? Extremely positive. The Hegemony's latest report indicates that collaboration with Corvan engineers has led to breakthrough improvements in mining efficiency. Apparently, the combination of Hegemony precision technology with Corvan durability requirements has created equipment that performs better under extreme conditions than either civilization could have developed alone. This was perhaps the most significant development of all. The consortium wasn't just facilitating trade between existing technologies. It was creating entirely new innovations through the combination of different approaches to problem solving. The implications for galactic civilization were staggering. Dr. Tanaka, Sarah said carefully, I need you to prepare a comprehensive briefing on Phase 2 expansion. The Earth Council wants to understand exactly what they're being asked to support. Tanaka's expression grew serious. There's still resistance to expanding the partnership? Not resistance, exactly. Caution. Some members of the Council worry that humanity is becoming too dependent on alien technology and cooperation. They prefer our traditional policy of cautious independence. It was a concern Sarah understood, even if she disagreed with it. Humanity had always prized its independence, viewing it as essential to survival in a galaxy full of more powerful civilizations. The consortium represented a fundamental shift away from that philosophy, and not everyone on Earth was comfortable with the change. A soft chime interrupted their conversation, indicating an incoming priority communication. Sarah activated her personal communicator, expecting another routine update from one of the consortium's operational sites. Instead, the holographic projection showed the face of Captain Jennifer Walsh, commander of the Earth observation post at the edge of the galaxy. Ambassador Chun, Walsh said, her expression grim. We have a situation developing that requires immediate attention. Long-range sensors have detected massive energy signatures approaching from beyond the galactic rim. The patterns don't match any known technology. Sarah felt a chill run through her. For months, intelligence reports had mentioned strange readings from the outer regions of the galaxy, refugee populations fleeing unknown threats, entire star systems going dark without explanation. Most analysts had dismissed these reports as either natural phenomena or exaggerated rumors. How massive are we talking about, Captain? Fleet-size formations, Ambassador. At least 50 vessels, possibly more. They're maintaining formation discipline and following direct approach vectors toward populated systems. This isn't random migration. It's organized and deliberate. ETA to inhabited space. 6 weeks, maybe 7 if they maintain current velocity. Ambassador, these ships are huge. Our preliminary analysis suggests individual vessels massing larger than anything in the Corvan battle fleet. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. An unknown fleet of that size could only have one purpose: conquest. The consortium's member civilizations had been so focused on their successful cooperation that they'd paid insufficient attention to external threats. Captain, I need you to transmit all sensor data immediately to Consortium Command, and send copies to both Chancellor Varrix and Admiral Kress. We need to convene an emergency session of the Consortium Council. Already done, Ambassador. And there's something else. The fleet's trajectory will bring them into consortium space first. Whatever their intentions, we're going to be their first contact with this part of the galaxy. The communication ended, leaving Sarah staring at the empty space where the projection had been. Dr. Tanaka's face showed the same concern that Sarah felt. The consortium's success in creating peaceful cooperation was about to face its ultimate test. Dr. Tanaka, cancel all routine meetings and schedule an emergency council session for this afternoon. High priority, all member representatives required to attend. What about the Phase 2 briefing? That just became a lot more urgent. If we're facing an external threat, the consortium's expansion and integration may be our best hope for survival. The emergency session convened in New Harmony Station's main council chamber, a circular amphitheater designed to emphasize the equality of all member civilizations. Representatives from 15 different species filled the tiered seating, their diverse forms creating a living symbol of galactic cooperation. But the atmosphere was tense rather than celebratory. Chancellor Varix's holographic projection dominated one section of the chamber, transmitted from the hegemony capital world where he was attending a technological summit. Admiral Kress appeared via secured military channel from the Corvin Fleet Command Station. Both leaders had reviewed the sensor data, and their expressions showed the same grim concern that filled the chamber. Sarah stood at the central podium, her position as mediator architect giving her the authority to convene emergency sessions. Honored delegates, we face a situation that none of us anticipated when we created this partnership. An unknown fleet of significant size is approaching consortium space with unknown intentions. She activated the chamber's holographic display system, showing the sensor readings and projected approach vectors. The scale of the unknown fleet was immediately apparent, and concerned murmurs rippled through the assembled delegates. Our analysis indicates that this fleet possesses technology and capabilities that exceed anything currently known in our region of the galaxy, Sarah continued. More significantly, their trajectory suggests that consortium space will be their first point of contact with our civilization. Ambassador Tvok of the Regelian Assembly was the first to speak. What evidence do we have that their intentions are hostile? Perhaps they are refugees seeking sanctuary, not conquerors seeking territory. A reasonable possibility, Admiral Kress replied, her image flickering slightly due to the transmission delay. But military doctrine requires that we prepare for the worst-case scenario while hoping for the best. A fleet of that size and organization doesn't typically represent desperate refugees. Chancellor Varix's enhanced voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. The hegemony's xenopsychology experts have analyzed the fleet's behavior patterns. The formation discipline and direct approach vectors suggest a military organization with specific objectives. Refugees would likely approach more cautiously, seeking communication before entering inhabited space. Representative Zex of the Zephyrian Collective stood, his forearms moving in patterns that conveyed deep concern. The critical question is whether our individual civilizations can mount an effective defense against such a fleet. Our analysis suggests that even the combined military forces of the hegemony and Corvin Empire might be insufficient. The observation sent a wave of unease through the chamber. If the two most powerful military forces in the galaxy couldn't guarantee protection, then smaller civilizations were extremely vulnerable. The consortium's peaceful cooperation suddenly seemed fragile in the face of external aggression. Which brings us to the central question, Sarah said, regaining control of the discussion. Do we face this threat as individual civilizations pursuing their separate interests, or do we respond as a unified consortium with integrated command and coordinated strategy? The question hung in the air like a challenge. The consortium had been designed for economic cooperation and resource development, not military defense. Extending their partnership into military affairs would represent a fundamental expansion of their relationship. General Thaxon's gruff voice cut through the silence. The aging Corvin leader had retired from active field command, but remained as military advisor to the consortium. The Corvin Empire has always believed that strength comes from unity of command and clarity of purpose. If we face a common threat, we should respond with common strength. The hegemony concurs, Varix added. But unified command requires unified intelligence and coordinated strategic planning. We would need to share military capabilities and tactical doctrine that have traditionally been closely guarded secrets. Sarah could see the delegates weighing the implications. Military cooperation would require trust levels far beyond anything they'd previously attempted. It would also create integrated command structures that might outlast the immediate crisis, fundamentally changing the nature of their civilization's relationships. Dr. Yenna of the Centauran Federation raised a crucial point. What role would humanity play in such a military alliance? Your species has limited military resources compared to the major powers. It was a fair question that struck at the heart of humanity's position in the consortium. Earth's military was respectable but small compared to those of the hegemony or Corvin Empire. In a purely military alliance, humanity would be a junior partner at best. Humanity would contribute what we do best, Sarah replied. coordination, communication, and strategic integration. Our experience in mediating between different civilizations could be valuable in creating truly integrated command structures. Admiral Cress leaned forward in her projection, her scarred features showing approval. The human approach to multi-species cooperation has proven effective in consortium operations. Military integration would benefit from similar coordination expertise. The discussion continued for several hours as delegates explored the practical and political implications of expanded cooperation. Technical experts presented analyses of the unknown fleet's capabilities, while military advisors outlined various response scenarios. Through it all, Sarah watched for signs of consensus building among the member civilizations. Gradually, a framework began to emerge. The consortium would expand its charter to include mutual defense provisions, with integrated command structures that built on the successful model of their economic cooperation. Each member civilization would contribute according to their capabilities, with military doctrine adapted to utilize the strengths of different species. But the most significant decision was the selection of overall command authority. After heated debate, the delegates agreed on a structure that reflected the consortium's core principles. Operational command would rotate among qualified officers from different member civilizations, with Admiral Cress serving as the first supreme commander due to her experience in multi-species coordination. The appointment is for 6 months initially, Sarah explained as the session concluded. If the crisis extends beyond that period, command authority will be reviewed and potentially rotated to ensure that no single civilization dominates the alliance. As delegates dispersed to consult with their home governments, Sarah found herself alone with the holographic projections of Chancellor Varix and Admiral Cress. The two leaders who had been on the brink of war 2 years earlier were now planning to coordinate their military forces against a common